Podcast. It is finally beginning to feel like autumn is arriving after far too long. It's been really quite mild and most of the trees have still been green until quite recently. And suddenly it feels like there's been a bit of a turn, which is something I'm really looking forward to. I'm looking forward to a bit more chilly weather rather than just endless mild greyness. And this time of year I end up wanting to spend a lot more time working on cosy projects and going out and bundling up for walks in lots of layers of nice warm knitted things. And so in this episode I've got a few things to show you. I'm not going to be able to show you the main thing I've been working on since the last episode because it's for a magazine and that one's going to be sent off soon for photographing and everything. That'll be coming out at some point next year. But that one's a cardigan, so has been taking up a fair bit of my making time. But I do have a few things to show you. So first up, I'll talk a little bit about this cardigan, which has made quite a few appearances on the podcast. And I finally very almost finished it. You might notice it's still missing some buttons, which I think I'm going to need to go into town and possibly go to my local yarn shop and pick up some nice buttons for it. I haven't quite decided what sort of buttons I'd like. I think I'd like something quite subtle and not too contrasty. But I'm really pleased to have this finished. I've been saying for a while that I need more cardigans in my wardrobe, and having just finished another one, I'm looking forward to casting on yet another for, well, this autumn and winter, but probably mostly winter because I doubt I'll get anything done in time for the rest of autumn. So this one is in Erica Knight British Blue 100. The colour is Cloak. I've been working on it for about a year and a half, and it's just, I'm not sure why, it's just something that got put aside. And I think last time I just had the sleeves to do, and I still needed to decide a couple of things of what I was going to do with the sleeves, because I don't know how well it's going to show up because it's quite a dark colour. But we've got these nice details of ridges down the button band, and I've done the same on the join between the body and the sleeve, and I'm really pleased with how that's turned out. It's not a cardigan that really draws attention to itself. I wanted it to be something that was quite neutral and could be worn possibly for slightly smarter things where I'm still okay wearing a cardigan rather than a jacket. And just something that was quite simple but had some nice little structural details. And so I think that's gone quite nicely. I've got some columns of ribbing just along the underarm, which just add a little bit of interest and make knitting the sleeves a bit more fun. And yeah, there's not loads to say about it because often when I finish something, if it's something I've designed, I'll be talking about whether it's going to be going into test knitting and when I'm likely to release the pattern. With this one, I'm not sure if I will release the pattern. I'd be up for doing so, but at the moment I'm not going to have time to get everything ready before I go on maternity leave next month. So it's something that has changed in the way I do my design work. And it's probably not something that comes up loads because it's definitely not the creative or visually fun part of designing. I've changed the way I set up my spreadsheets. So it used to be that I would work in a way that I think is common to quite a lot of designers, where I would do all of the calculations for the size that I'm making and do that either in advance or as I'm going along at each stage when I come to it. And then once I've got it finished, I would then go and grade all of the rest of the sizes based on the numbers that I've got for the size that I've made. And that works fine, but I don't know at what point I switched, but now I tend to do it so that I do the calculations for the size I'm working on, but I calculate all of the other sizes as well as I go along, which means that by the time I have finished the sample, I also have all of the numbers ready to go for all of the other sizes. And I feel that helps. It helps me to keep track of things. I often, as I'm doing that, will write up a draft version of the pattern in quite quick note form, but I do everything in Google Drive, so I don't have to try and decipher my scribbles on a piece of paper, because if I go and look at that a few weeks later, I'm going to have no idea what I was trying to say. So I usually have my spreadsheet and my pattern draft document working in tandem. And so recently, for definitely the last probably year or so, that has been working really nicely for me. But I started working on this before I was working like that, so I only have the numbers for one set of sizes, and while I do have perfectly adequate notes and everything, it's just going to be a bit more work to get everything all sorted out and prepared so that I could release a properly graded pattern. But if it's a design you like and would consider knitting if I were to release a pattern for it, I'd love to hear, because I definitely consider getting it ready once I'm back from maternity leave next year, and maybe getting it ready for publication and just sorting out my documents a bit better. But in the meantime, it's something that is really nice and comfy. I've mentioned before that I love the yarn. It's just an absolute joy to work with. It's sort of a nice change from a lot of the quite rustic knitting I do. This one is a little bit more refined. It's still a British wool. It's 100% blue-faced Leicester, and it's worsted spun, so it's quite smooth. You can get some really nice stitch definition from it. And yeah, it's just quite a nice comfy thing that I can sling on, and eventually I'll get buttons on it, which quite soon I probably won't be able to do up anyway. So yes, this is, I think, the first thing I finished since the last time I recorded. But I'm going to show you something that I had actually already finished, but was holding on to show you. Now, the rest of the things I'm going to show you, we're going to have quite a lot of natural coloured fibres, both ones that are undyed, and there's a variety of natural colours there, or ones that have been naturally dyed. Now, this first thing is a combination of two natural colours of alpaca. So if you are familiar with my yarns, I have a range called Kaya Baby Alpaca, which is alpaca fibre from a very small local alpaca farm. And I wanted to just bring in something quite simple, because alpacas come in an amazing range of colours, and I really, really love the use of naturally coloured alpaca. I have family in South America, and so up in the Andes you see a lot of colour work that in some ways is almost similar to Icelandic style jumpers, and a lot of knitting using just the natural colours of alpaca, and it's something I really love. And I wanted to do something that wasn't really drawing from that tradition in terms of motifs and design, but just using some undyed alpaca, because it's got a lovely sort of gentle quality to it. And so this is one I have designed using just two colours, And so this is a limited edition alpaca that I've added into the shop. I released it a couple of weeks ago, so quite a lot of it has sold already. This is paddock alpaca, which is sort of a sport weight, almost a DK weight, depending on how you knit with it. So we've got the white and the mid brown. You can see there's quite a lot of drape to it. So alpaca tends not to have a huge amount of structure. But I really like how this knits up. It's beautifully fuzzy, and I just love the soft quality it gives to the colour work. So I've started here with a corrugated rib in the two colours, and then that feeds on up into the stranded colour work. And I just really like this hat. It feels perfectly wintry. I've called it the Rhyme Flower hat, which is RIMEFLOWER. And it was kind of inspired by flowers like hemlock and giant hogweed, where in the winter the seed heads tend to stay there throughout, but they're all dried up and brown, and when you go out in the mornings they get covered in sort of spiky little bits of frost, and that feeling of the brown, sort of not quite petals but seeds, covered in the white frost, sort of led to this design, which, yeah, really cosy for winter mornings. It's a fairly simple knit, and it's sort of a close-fitting beanie. We've got fairly simple decreases, and yes, so this one is available as an individual pattern on my website and on Ravelry, so you can make it and substitute with a yarn of your choice. There are also a couple of kits on my website, which include a digital download of the pattern and one skein of each of the colours, which means that you have enough for the hat, and then you'll have some left over, probably not quite enough to make another hat with the colours reversed, although I think if you make the smallest size you could get away with doing that. But you could make something like maybe some little wrist warmers or something to go with it out of the same colours. So yes, that's that one. I really love it. I actually came up with this motif quite a long time ago, coming out of last winter, and I'm really glad that I found the right design for it and something where it felt like it fitted, and a yarn combination that it worked really nicely with. So yes, that is that one. I'm very fond of it and I think it's quite cute. And yes, I shall put the links to those things below, so you can find them nice and easily. And if you are watching this long in the future and it's all sold out, I'm sorry. There are also at the moment a few individual skeins of the brown yarn available. I think the white has sold. Most of them have sold out. But if you wanted to make something a bit bigger, then there are plenty of skeins of the brown, which is a really nice colour. And then more alpaca. I'll look at this one very quickly because it's not particularly interesting and I showed it last time. This is a sleeveless jumper I'm making from, again, undyed alpaca from the same alpaca farm. This one isn't actually a yarn I carry. Excuse me. And if I show you, the yarn is very slightly lighter than this one. And yeah, this is just endless stockinette. which I'm looking forward to getting to the end of so that I can work on some personal projects. But this is what is keeping my hands busy most of the time at the moment. And I will look forward to it being done. There is something about just endless stockinette in alpaca, because alpaca doesn't have much stretch, unlike wool, which tends to be fairly bouncy. It just makes for not the most enjoyable of knits when you're just going round and round and round on a body of stockinette. But then a much more fun project that I'm working on, which isn't a work one, is, I think, how can I be? I've got this box of little balls of yarn. These are Mendip 4-ply and Garthenor Organic number 2, which are quite similar yarns. They're both woolen spun. They have Mendip 4-ply is a tiny bit heavier, but they're spun to quite a similar spec otherwise. And I have done quite a lot of natural dye experiments on these yarns, because at some point last year, I think it was last year, I did a collaboration with Garthenor where we did some sets of naturally dyed mini skeins. And before I did that, I did a lot of prep work, just dyeing up sample minis to test what plants I wanted to use, what was giving good colour at that point, what was going to work on the yarns, because some of them are marled, so you've got a lighter wool marled together with a darker naturally coloured wool. And so I ended up with lots of these little samples, which have, in a lot of cases, are slightly weirdly variegated, because what I've done with them is I wanted to see how the colour would turn out on its own, but then how that would compare to if I modified it with iron. Because iron is one of my favourite modifiers. It's quite an easy modifier to make, and if dyeing a mini skein and then just dunking half of it in the iron modifier is a really nice way to compare the colours that you get from just the dye stuff on its own and then with the iron modifier. But it does mean that you have some quite strange variegation sometimes, especially on a mini skein where it's smaller, and so you get quite short repeats. And so I ended up with a lot of these minis that I wasn't really going to do much with, because en masse I find them quite ugly. A lot of them are colours that I decided not to use because they weren't turning out how I wanted them to. But there's also something really satisfying about all of these sort of muted natural colours together. And they weren't something I was going to use for like a garment for myself or something. And so I have ended up starting a baby blanket, just using these yarns. I'm doing it centre out. Oops. So I started in here. And I'm doing it in crochet, which is not something I do frequently at all. But I just wanted to have something where I could use the yarn I had, and when I get bored of it I can just stop. I don't have to make sure that I've got enough yarn for a border or anything, or that I'm going to be able to sew pieces together and make sure that they make a proper rectangle. I didn't want any of that. I just wanted to keep going with a big square. And so that's what I'm doing, and it's quite fun because it means that, you know, you get bored of one colour and you break it off and start with another. And I'm doing quite short little runs of each colour, and so it's giving this quite sort of mottled effect. And I'm not even going to pretend that I think this is pretty. There is something really satisfying about these colours together, but it's definitely very sludgy, and it's more a case of finding a use for some nice yarn, but that I wouldn't use for anything else. And so my child will be wrapped up in something that has had quite a lot of love put into it, but sludge. But yeah, I think there's something slightly cute about it. It's sort of the opposite of kitsch. And yeah, so that's that project. It's just something I'm working on in the evenings, and it's just nice to put some mindless work into, while also being quite engaging, because every so often you're switching colours and seeing what colour you're going to use next. And I quite like that sort of little micro decision making in a project, just where you're improvising and making tiny choices as you go. So those are the things I've been working on yarn craft wise. Now the last thing I'm going to show you is not yarn yet, but early this year I started a project with some fleece, where I'm processing it and am then going to spin it into yarn for some kind of knitting or weaving project, not exactly sure. And so I've had this fleece washed for ages and finally got round to naturally dyeing it, and it's really pretty. If you have been watching for a while, you probably know that I like orange, and I just really like how this colour has turned out. I dyed it with onion skins, and I actually made a quick video of the process, sort of just teaching very briefly how I dye with onion skins. And so if that is something you might like to try, or you'd be interested in just watching the process of, I'll put a link to that video for you. And I'm now working on processing that fleece, so separating out all of the locks into nice long bits of fluff. So these are the bits that I'm going to be spinning with for this project. Got a bag of those. I haven't got very far so far, it's a slow process. And then there are these bits which are shorter fibres with some neps and some little clumps in, and these I'm keeping because it's still perfectly good wool, and I will use those in a different project. And I'm likely to blend this wool with other wool, so that I can make a decent amount of yarn, and that might be other naturally dyed yarn, naturally dyed wool, or fleece that is naturally coloured already. So I've got some nice dark brown and also some nice greyish brown fleece that I can use. Although the greyish brown, if I decide to do that, I'll have to wait a while because it's not washed, and at the moment I shouldn't be handling raw fleece. So yes, little floof update, and yes, so it's sort of interesting at the moment because I'm winding down on work projects, and at that point where I'm full of enthusiasm for wanting to start or carry on with loads of other projects, because I'm like that, as well as my usual sort of roughly 5 knitting projects that I tend to have on the go, with some of them in the background. So there are a few things that I've not shown for a while because I've not worked on them much. I usually have some other fibery projects going on as well, and I'm quite aware that at some point I'm going to have to pack up a lot of things and put them away for an undetermined amount of time. There is a chance that we will be moving house at some point soon, which is going to be a whole load of woe. Woe not as in misery, woe as in just slight overwhelm. But that's very exciting. So yes, that's sort of all I have to show you for now. There are lots of things going on all over the place, and I'm trying to show the things that are going to be the most interesting and that I can actually show at any given point. And we're sort of at the stage where I'm going to be working towards winding down the podcast for a period of time. So next month's episode will be the last one I do for quite a while. I might do some kind of YouTube live session, maybe with a Q&A or something before I go on maternity leave. Not about the maternity leave, although if you want to, you'd be welcome to ask questions about that. If you'd be interested in showing up to take part in a YouTube live session where, you know, I'll be showing what I'm making and also answering any questions people might have for me, let me know in the comments. I'd really like to hear. And yeah, then next episode I'll be telling you all about, you know, what things are going to look like in Skua land for the next few months. And yeah, in the meantime, you can find me on Instagram. You can sign up to my newsletter, which will always have the sort of clearest and easiest information about any new updates. And I'll be giving the dates and the rundown on what's going to be happening with the online shop and everything there. And in the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and bye bye for now.